This is Grand Theft Auto 3, and this game is a lot of things. I mean, it laid the foundations for one of the most profitable franchises in video game history. It started an unstoppable tidal wave of open-world games, and it kept the news channels very, very busy.
This is the nation's top-selling video game, and millions of kids are mastering it by learning to slaughter bystanders.
But this game is also nothing short of a magic trick. A trick where Rockstar North, then DMA Design, managed to squeeze an entire city, an entire 4-kilometre wide pastiche of New York City, into the tiny 32 megabyte memory chip of a PlayStation 2. So, I'm Mark Brown, this is Game Maker's Toolkit, and here's how they did it. Okay, so I think we need a super quick and super simplified primer on how memory works in games, or else none of this is going to make sense. So, on PlayStation 2, you've got the DVD, which is a whopping 4.7 gigabytes. That's big enough to hold the entire game, every model, texture, sound effect, and radio station. But it's also painfully slow, with a transfer speed of about 5 to 6 megabytes per second, way too slow to load assets on the fly. But then there's the memory inside the system itself. This thing is lightning fast. It can move files at 3.2 gigabytes per second. Gigabytes, so that makes it perfect for assets. But it's also tiny, at just 32 megabytes, less than 1% of the DVD's capacity. Now, in a traditional game, well, the console loads all of the data needed for the current area from the DVD and into the memory. All of the models, textures, animations, sound effects, and so on. Then when you leave the area, those assets can be flushed, and the assets for the next area can be copied into the memory, with a loading screen while the assets are shifted across. But this setup would not work for Grand Theft Auto 3. It doesn't have individual areas with walls and doors to separate the zones. Instead, it's a sprawling metropolitan city that you can explore freely in any direction. A city made up of thousands of unique models for every building, vehicle, and pedestrian in the game, about 77 megabytes in total. And then thousands of different textures for every material, sign, and character skin, another 45 megabytes. And so with a total of about 130 megabytes of data, Liberty City is way too big for our paltry 32 megabyte budget. Well, okay, let me be perfectly honest. Liberty City is split into 3 different islands: the industrial zone of Portland, the downtown sprawl of Staunton Island, and the luxury suburbs of Shoreside Vale. And these are treated as separate levels, with quick loading screens whenever you cross between them. But even still, each one of these islands is still too big to fit into memory. Take Portland. It's got over 600 unique models, requiring roughly 40 to 50 megabytes of data for the models and textures, still way more than the 32 megabyte budget. So what could Rockstar do? Well, the studio's first idea was to just make the city in a much more simplistic way, to use basic 3D models with low-resolution textures so each island could comfortably fit into memory. But the game's technical director Obbe Vermeij said this resulted in the city looking bland. So the game's other technical lead, Adam Fowler, came up with a much more ambitious solution. It works like this. Liberty City is split into thousands of small sectors. Then there's an invisible square around the player, and all of the models needed for the sectors in that square are loaded into memory. Then, as you move around the city, the game loads the models and textures for the buildings in the sectors you enter, and unloads all of the assets from the sectors as you leave them. And because the new models will always be far away from the player, it doesn't matter that it might take a short while to load them off of the DVD. It's a technique called streaming. And we can actually see this happening. Like, come with me for a second. I'm just going to pop you here. So I've got GTA 3 running on PC in this window, and a process monitor, which shows everything happening in memory in this window. And so if I get in my car and start driving down the street, you'll see that files start loading in, specifically txd.image and GTA3.image, which hold the textures and all of the models. Now, it's just a small chunk of those files. So if we take, for example, GTA3.image, and we see that it's loading in at the offset of 929,1800. And then if I open the GTA3 image in this tool and find the file at that offset, here it is, 929,1800. It's a diner sign. And if we extract it and load it into this page, we can see, hey, it's the sign for the diner that's just loaded into memory, which is all the way over here. Now, I'd love to show this happening in a more real-time, visual way, but because the streaming system is tied to the camera and not the player, well, even if I take control of the camera and fly far away, the streaming will just follow me and the city will materialize around me. The only solution ultimately would be to somehow get the GTA 3 source code, rewrite several sections of the program, and compile a brand new executable. So I got the GTA 3 source code, I rewrote several sections of the program, and I compiled a brand new executable. Now you can see the trick, how Grand Theft Auto 3 loads and unloads a small number of assets into memory as you move around Liberty City. It secretly builds the world in front of you and it silently deletes the world behind your back. Basically, instead of trying to fit a whole city into memory, Rockstar instead built a moving window which shows just enough of the city to make the illusion work. And with this, Rockstar could build a city as big as it wanted, with artist Aaron Garbett saying, getting it right effectively removed a lot of limitations for scale and detail. We could build what we wanted as long as the area around the player would fit in memory, and we could get it off the DVD fast enough. Now, I should note, GTA 3 is certainly not the first game to come up with the idea of loading assets into memory while you play. In fact, this was already happening on the previous generation. Take the PlayStation 1 game Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, developed by Crystal Dynamics. The developer realized it could chop an entire world into lots of small chunks and then lay them out end to end in a line. Then, when a player approaches the boundary of one chunk, the game would quickly start loading the next part so it was ready for you by the time you got there, giving you a whole world to explore without needing to stop for a loading screen. And that same technique has been used in hundreds of games, from Jak and Daxter and Metroid Prime to Uncharted and God of War. It also explains why video game characters spend so much time slowly squeezing through tight gaps. It gives the console time to load the next area into memory. But back to Grand Theft Auto, this probably was the first game to use a streaming solution to create a dense urban environment. A world where the developers can't predict which area you'll go to next, or hide its loading behind doors or elevators or tight gaps. This was an actual open world that you can explore freely in literally 360 degrees. But pulling it off was not easy, and this ambitious plan led to 5 big problems for Rockstar to solve. So here's the first problem: pop-in. If GTA 3 worked exactly as I just described, with assets loading and unloading in a tight rectangle around the player, then it would look something like this. A game where bits of the world materialize out of thin air in front of you, with the dreaded pop-in effect of a last-generation game. So it's not enough to just stream in the models nearest to the player, but at the same time, you can only cast your net so wide before running out of memory. So here's the solution. The game checks a large number of sectors, but in those faraway zones, the game only loads the bigger structures like buildings, bridges, ships, and cranes. So the area around your character is fully loaded in, but anything more than a few sectors away will only feature the largest structures. Of course, this would still eat up a lot of memory. So instead of using the actual models, these faraway structures use a simplified, low-polygon imposter with a crummy, low-resolution texture. Then when we get close enough, the real model and texture can be streamed in and gracefully fade in over the top of the low poly copy. It's a system called LOD, or Level of Detail. And it even extends to the other islands. Portland, Staunton and Shoreside each have low poly models that sit on the horizon as stand-ins for the other bits of Liberty City. Actually, Staunton has two, with different models depending on whether you're looking over from Portland or Shoreside. There's no point rendering the back of these skyscrapers if you're in the east, after all. Better to save on triangles. All of this lets Liberty City maintain its distant skyline for immersion and navigation purposes, but by using low-resolution stand-ins for these faraway buildings, the game can save a lot of memory. The next problem is that, well, Liberty City is not the only thing we need to store in memory. That 32 megabyte pile of RAM also needs to keep track of animations, pedestrian AI, physics calculations, the location of your last car, and so on. The only thing it doesn't need to store are the radio stations, which play directly off the DVD. So this means only a small slice of the total memory overhead can be dedicated to streaming.
I don't know exactly how much memory GTA 3 uses, but if you take San Andreas, which is using the same engine on the same console, take the DVD and put it into your computer, you'll find a file called stream.ini, which shows that just 13.5 megabytes of memory are dedicated to streaming the city.
On top of that, Liberty City is more than just buildings and lampposts. This is a bustling city filled with cars and pedestrians, which must also share that memory space. So all of these systems had to be heavily optimized to save enough room for the city streaming. Take the cars. GTA 3 has about 60 unique vehicles, and I'd estimate that the full fleet is about 10 megabytes worth of models and textures. So it wouldn't be sensible to keep them all loaded in at the same time. Instead, the game keeps a very strict pool. Only 8 vehicle types can be loaded into memory at any one time. When a car is spawned in, it must either use a vehicle from one of those 8 slots or boot an older car out to make room. And because that tiny pool also needs to contain the car you're currently driving, the last car you drove, any parked cars in the nearby area, and common vehicles like taxis and police vehicles, including SWAT cars, helicopters, and army trucks if your wanted level is high enough, well, this is why you'll sometimes see the same cars repeating again and again. There's only a few spare slots left for vehicle variations.
This also explains that spooky GTA phenomenon of looking for one very specific car only to finally track it down, and now everyone in Liberty City seems to be driving that car. It makes sense, because it's now in one of those 8 car slots, it's much more likely for it to be spawned in as the next vehicle. My car's on fire. Help.
So basically, with only a tiny amount of memory to go around, everything in the game must be as optimized and streamlined as possible to make sure there's room for the main city streaming system. Fancy another problem? How about memory fragmentation? So in super simplified terms, if you remove a small asset from memory, then it leaves a nasty little hole in your total memory space. And let's do it a few more times. And then if we load in a bigger asset, well, even though there is space for it, that space is fragmented into lots of little holes, and so the asset just has to lump on the end, exceeding the total amount of memory and causing the game to crash. Not good. That's fragmentation. And so if you're constantly pushing assets in and out of memory, fragmentation becomes very likely, and memory blockages are almost guaranteed to occur. So Smarty Pants Adam Fowler had to write a bespoke memory manager that could deal with these issues, with functions that can merge and move blocks of memory around to avoid fragmentation. It can also aggressively free up memory if needed, going in and deleting stuff behind the camera or big buildings in the distant skyline. Another clever trick was to keep many of the asset files as the exact same size. Like, among the models and textures, over 500 of them are exactly 2 kilobytes, and 416 are exactly 4 kilobytes. That way, assets can seamlessly take each other's place as they load in and out, filling those gaps in memory and avoiding fragmentation altogether. To check if this all worked, Fowler would attach the player character to the train that zips around Portland, and then set the game running on 5 or so PS2 dev kits before he left work for the night. And as Vermeij explained on the podcast Kiwi Talkz,
he was hoping that he'd come in the morning and that the games were still running. And the first time he did that, like they all crashed after 5 minutes. And then he would spend a couple of days figuring out what had gone wrong. And then, did it again. And then they crashed after 30 minutes. And then they got maybe an hour. And eventually they got it through the night. So that meant that like for the whole night, the game was like loading models and unloading, loading models and unloading.
Problem number 4 is seeking. So here's the thing. CDs and DVDs are designed for the continuous read of something linear, like an album or a movie. And so the data is embedded in a non-stop spiral that goes from the edge to the center, and the laser reads that microscopic groove in a continuous line. But if you want to jump around to another part of the disk, called seeking, then the laser head has to move. And the acceleration, movement, and deceleration of that mechanical part all takes time. So now imagine how GTA 3 is constantly asking the PS2's DVD reader to seek out different bits of the disk. To speed things up, Rockstar had to literally optimize the position of assets on the disk to reduce seeking time. That meant bunching up assets from the same part of the city so the laser wouldn't have to travel as far to get the next batch of buildings or roads. Also, the DVD reader code is given a queue of assets to load in, but it will prioritize the ones closest to its current read position instead of going through them in the order they came in. And Vermeij says the team experimented with duplicating assets on the DVD, because it's actually more efficient to have multiple versions of common models like trees and lampposts at different points on the disk, instead of having to constantly seek back to find that single tree model. And this technique is still used in game development, with a game like Insomniac's Spider-Man having hundreds of the same mailbox model at different points on the Blu-ray. Now you might wonder if all that seeking is safe for the DVD drive, and Rockstar shared that worry. Here's producer Leslie Benzies in the documentary The PlayStation Revolution.
Streaming was a big risk. Could a drive inside a machine constantly move for 24 hours straight and not melt?
Now, it obviously didn't melt your PS2's drive, and Vermeij assumes that this was cleared with Sony before the game was sold, but it's possible this did do some damage to the console. And then, the final problem. Even with all of these techniques and optimizations, the disk simply couldn't read assets fast enough, and if players moved through Liberty City too quickly, they could outrun the streaming system and see the world appear in front of them. Or even worse, fall through the floor and into the blue hell beneath. So the only real solution was to just slow players down. Cars were given a strict maximum speed, and in certain parts of the city, the developers secretly increased the air resistance on vehicles by a few percentage points. Not enough for players to notice, but enough to let the disk catch up. Flying vehicles were completely ruled out, and the only plane in the game had its wings clipped, so it was impossible to fly. Well, almost impossible. And the layout of the city needed adjusting too. Vermeij explains that in its original form, Portland featured a main drag that ran practically across the entire island, a nightmare scenario where players could build up to max speed while the streaming code struggled to load in the buildings on both sides of the road. So, in the end, this big building was placed directly in the centre of the main thoroughfare, so it wasn't possible to go so fast.
Now, I kind of want to put this to the test and see if I can push the game to its absolute limit and move so fast that the game can't load in models and textures quickly enough. So I went to Staunton Island to get the fastest car in the game, which is the Infernus. I feel like that's a pretty good start. And I actually am going to go to that main drag in Portland because even though they put that building in the way to stop me going so fast, there's still a alleyway down the side of the building which I can use to slip by and hopefully get some real speed up. Okay, I mean I can actually just about see that alleyway in the distance. Now I'm going to put on a cheat that Rockstar put in the game that lets you speed up the gameplay, which seems like kind of a strange decision to put in a game that's all about slowing the player down, but here we go. Okay, now we're going at like much faster speeds, and we're just going to have to get quite lucky with the traffic to blast through that hole. Okay, let's go. Look out. Look out, 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 look out. Ow! So there's a trick that speedrunners use, where if you're in the cinematic camera, it despawns cars, and so there's less traffic to deal with. So I guess we're just going in a straight line. It's maybe the best thing to use. Oh! Oh! I saw it! I saw it! Not enough to fly into the abyss, but I saw it. I saw the world streaming in. But still, pretty impressive. And also you have to remember that this PS2 and this copy of GTA 3 are like 25 years old, and this disc is a little bit scratched. And seriously, the speed of the streaming technology is entirely dependent on the surface of this disc and the condition of the laser inside that PS2. And also this has happened. It doesn't really affect anything. It just makes me sad. I need to get some glue.
And ultimately, that was pushing the game to its absolute limit and using cheats. And in normal play, you almost never see this happen, a testament, I reckon, to how well Rockstar implemented this system. So that's the trick. Rockstar had to fit a roughly 130 megabyte city into the tiny 32 megabyte memory chip on your PlayStation 2. And the only way to do it was to move assets from the disk and into memory at rapid speeds, constantly chucking out the buildings and trees in your rearview mirror to make room for the shops and bridges just around the corner. But with this, and a lot of clever optimizations, Rockstar showed it was possible to have a rich and detailed open world on console, and it laid the foundation for the rest of the series. That, of course, includes 2 more GTA entries on PlayStation 2, which are even more impressive in their implementation. Vice City added helicopters by only showing low-poly models when you're above a certain altitude, so there's enough memory spare for the most distant skylines. And San Andreas got rid of the separate islands and halting loading screens, partly by having so much empty countryside in between the cities that one will be entirely out of memory by the time you reach another. Even so, it's pretty mind-blowing that this is working on such a low-powered console. But even as gaming hardware got better, these techniques still needed to be used, because the worlds became more detailed and rich in step. Like, on a modern computer with gigabytes and gigabytes of RAM, I can easily fit all of Grand Theft Auto 3's Liberty City in memory at one time. No streaming needed. But I can't fit the whole world of GTA 4 or 5, so it's back to the cheeky optimizations. Like putting roadworks in the middle of Algonquin's longest road to stop players from driving so fast that they outpace the streaming tech. Now, in more recent times, a move to solid-state drives is making things a lot easier for developers. There's no more seeking, so you don't need to optimize asset location or duplicate dustbins everywhere. But even still, I can promise you now that Grand Theft Auto 6 will still stream bits of its world in and out of memory, and it will use some of the same techniques, optimizations, and maybe even a few lines of code from Grand Theft Auto 3. The game that performed a magic trick and proved it was possible to squeeze an entire city into just 32 megabytes of memory.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. So one of the fun side effects of making this video was getting to debunk a video game myth I had been carrying for about 20 years. So I had always believed that the reason you can't fly the plane in GTA 3, the Dodo, was because of 9/11. Basically, Rockstar didn't want you to emulate a terrorist attack in their game. And it makes sense. GTA 3 was just about to come out when New York was hit by an awful terrorist attack, and it wasn't a good look for a studio making a game about causing chaos in a sort of fictionalized New York City. So this certainly gave Rockstar pause. And it's true that Rockstar did change some elements of GTA 3 very quickly to reflect what had happened in New York. So they repainted the cop cars, so they no longer looked like NYPD vehicles. They removed one mission that referenced terrorism, a few bits and bobs like that. But they didn't touch the Dodo because it was never designed to be able to fly. As I say in the video, being able to fly over Liberty City would reveal some of the edge cases and some of the issues around the streaming technology that they wouldn't get to fix until Vice City. And also, Liberty City just isn't designed to be played from the air. A lot of the rooftops in the game don't have collision, and there are bits of the city, like in between a ring of houses, there's just a big blue void. So it's clearly not made for flying. So there we go. I'd always believed that the Dodo was cut because of 9/11. It was just technical stuff. Let me know if you've had a video game myth debunked in your lifetime.